Hello, welcome back to the Groove Agent 5 tutorial series. Today we're dealing with Acoustic Agent Styles. Here I've loaded an Acoustic Agent kit, simple kit. I've not done anything to it yet. Got this Garage Rock preset. And one of the things that I don't think is super great about Groove Agent is the blurring of the distinction between styles and MIDI patterns. It tries to make them seem like they're the same thing, and it's not immediately obvious by clicking on any pad whether or not it's actually a style or a MIDI pattern. The only real evidence you have is that in the agent page, when you load a kit that's got styles on, it's going to default to the style page. That's not really adequate as far as I'm concerned. If you go over to the MIDI page and you click this pad, it doesn't activate if it's in the wrong view. There's not much visible evidence, so that's a bit rubbish, I think. But anyway, that being said, styles are actually fantastic. They can do everything that MIDI patterns can, and we can actually really easily convert a style into a MIDI pattern. I just click this little arrow button here, convert style to MIDI pattern, and whenever we do that, we jump over to the MIDI tab, and now we do have a MIDI pattern. But bizarrely, it is also still a style. When we saw in our earlier videos in this series, we had an introduction to styles, and we saw how one of the great features of them is this complexity intensity grid. The ability for one single groove to sound like many by moving this thing around. So all of that is still there, despite the fact that I clicked this little convert to MIDI button. What that actually does is it takes a snapshot of the style as it currently is and throws that into the MIDI pattern editor. So having messed with some of those settings while I was just talking to you then, if I click this button again, we've now got a different pattern over here. We have a look at this, we've got them and this kind of stuff going on over here. If I go back to my style, increase the complexity, maybe turn it into a fill and click my button. Now I've got a completely different shape. So it's a snapshot of the moment in time of the way the style looks right there and then. But we're not here to talk about MIDI patterns today, we're here to deal with styles. So let's have a look at some of the features. First things first, we have a main groove for every style, and that's the little light at the top. And if we set it going, this is our main groove. Get the volumes right, there we go. Now the complexity that I've just set there in the grid is variable with the auto complexity option. The moment it's turned off, and so the complexity is stable. If I set auto complexity to once every bar, it's going to change every 4 beats for this particular groove. We're going to get a new complexity. Now at the moment that's actually chosen my default setting. That is a perfectly valid option. Now the range over which Groove Agent will vary complexity isn't infinite. It won't go all the way down to the bottom and all the way up to the top. It seems to me to have about a plus or minus 30% spread. I've not actually been able to find out what its range is, but if I move this down, now it'll track there or thereabouts this level of complexity. This is going to change the complexity every half a bar. 2 beats, 2 beats, 2 beats. For the number 1 setting, the first beat is going to be more complex than the setting, and all subsequent beats will be as complex or less. So beat number 1 is going to be to the right, beat number 2, 3 and 4 are going to be on it or to the left of it. Right, left. And you can see it's changing complexity every beat. But the first beat is always more complex, and beats 2, 3 and 4 are always equal to or less than. 1 plus 3 starts getting a little bit difficult to track. It's going to be more complex, less than or equal, more, less than or equal every single beat. don't need to explain the others, they're pretty obvious. Autofill, let's just stop this for a moment while we talk about autofill. Everything up until now has been just playing the main groove. If we introduce autofill into the equation, it means every 2 bars we're going to get a random fill, and by default Styles have 8 different fills. You can manually explicitly select each of the 8 at any given time, but you can also ask Groove Agent to play a random fill from its available options every this many bars. In fact, you can go beyond that and press this little cog and turn on or off fills that you want to hear, so only the lit fills will actually be played, and it'll randomly select from the 6 that I've just chosen there. All of that then ties back to the auto complexity, so that when in autofill mode, the complexity changes every time a fill is played. I'll set it to 4 because it's a little bit difficult to track. Watch the complexity change and fills get played. When the fills are played, you'll see them in a duller colour corresponding to the number of the fill that's being played, and you'll see that 3 and 4 never get picked. Here we go. So it picked fill number 6, and now we've picked a new complexity. We're playing these 4 bars now. Here comes the fill. Played 7, and then we picked a new complexity. And it's going to do that every 4 bars. Now it's going to do it every 2 bars. And you can hear already we're starting to get incredibly rich patterns. This is just magnificent. During all of that, while Groove Agent's doing its thing, we're also able to manually intervene and move this thing, and now it'll pick a new range over which to set its auto complexity scales. You know, the groove in the background is going to change because we've picked a new complexity and intensity. So intensity is basically volume. So we control the volume of the played beats in the y-axis and the complexity on the x. I'm going to turn all of this auto stuff off, so we have a nice stable rhythm to discuss as we go on to look at these 3 options below. We'll deal with crash first. When crash is set to always, it means any crash sounds that appear in either the main groove or the fills are going to be played, but we can separate those out to ensure that only parts of them are played. If I set this to fill and ending, the main groove itself will have all of its fills taken away. If I set it to explicitly main, the main groove will contain crashes and the fills won't. So let's hear this groove. And there we've got a crash immediately. If I turn it off, you won't hear that crash again. This groove will play in the background and you won't hear another crash, because we have no autofill settings. We're only playing the main groove and we've told it not to play the crashes. Put it back on, and then eventually when we get round to the... there we go. I'll just stop the groove again for a moment to give you a word of warning. It's not perfect. If I set this fill to play explicitly, so we're just going to play fills now, I'll turn the crash off. We'll get this fill going. Okay. Now if I set this to main, we shouldn't hear any crashes, because we're basically telling Groove Agent to only play crashes on the main part of the groove. So it's kind of, it gets there. Most of the time it actually works. I've kind of happily / sadly picked an example where it isn't perfect. In the manual for only play crashes for fills and endings, this sentence is a bit of a train wreck. It says, crash symbols from a main pattern that are used to fill up endings that don't start at the first beat are not played. So what I suggest you do, rather than trying to figure out that ridiculous sentence, so take it with a little bit of a pinch of salt. It looks like they've tried to be a little bit too clever, got slightly carried away, not quite implemented it perfectly, and everything kind of nearly works. The heart is in the right place, but it's not actually spot on. I just had to go back to that sentence to read it again. It's an absolute beauty, isn't it? Oh dear. Let's have a look at Ride. In order to have a look at Ride, I'll load a different kit that utilises one. So here's our Ride. And we've taken away the Ride bell. Now we don't hear that sound. Bring it back. Pretty self-explanatory stuff. Hi-hat allows you to determine whether or not tip and or shank articulations are added. In all modes they're both used, and you can explicitly say only want to hear the tips, only want to hear the shanks. Again, we need to find a style that contains those different articulations, so I'll load one of those up. Okay, here we are. Let's get that groove going. So there's our hi-hat tip. Here's our hi-hat shank. Now the shank isn't played. So these three options below are really style sensitive. They're only going to do anything if the style's utilising that particular part of the drum kit. And even then, you're going to get variable results depending on how the internal style's being constructed and whether or not that particular sound is being interpreted as a crash sound that's capable of being filtered with this button here. So it is a little bit hit and miss. The stuff above, auto complexity, always works, always great, highly recommended. The stuff below, used with a little bit more discretion, but nevertheless, you do get additional levels of flexibility there, a little bit over-engineered in my opinion. Swing and quantize are pretty self-explanatory. I've loaded yet another drum sound to show these off. Let's do swing first. 1, 2, 3, pretty straight time. Say that swing. Really swinging. Those three notes are increasingly swinging as we increase the dial. At any time, if you want to see what this is doing, go back to 0, convert that to a Midi pattern, and then you can have a look at it in the pattern editor. There are the three notes, the toms that are causing that 3-hit effect. They're all quantized to 16ths. Reintroduce the swing, reconvert to Midi, and then when we look at those notes in the pattern editor, they've been shifted and they're no longer on the 16th lines. And quantize is a dynamic setting that will tighten everything up. Final function we haven't dealt with yet is break. Let's get that going. Have an autofill. If I engage break, you'll get a moment of silence in between fills. Pretty self-explanatory. Now I think the best way to demonstrate styles more holistically, it's all very well and good breaking into the functionality. We need to know what it does, but you really want to see it in real world action. The whole point of this stuff is to enable us to build easy dynamic rhythms really quickly, and we can actually do this in real time. So what I've done is I've created our standard MIDI setup. If you go back and have a look at my video on how we set up MIDI tracks, this is all covered over there. So Agent 1 pattern is tied to the MIDI keyboard. Let's do it explicitly. So The MIDI data from my keyboard is going in here. So if I press D#0, it starts playing the D#0 pad. That information's been routed to the pattern pads in Groove Agent, which is how we're able to hear it. The second track, Agent 1 instrument, is taking its MIDI data from Groove Agent itself. So any MIDI output that comes out of Groove Agent, the drum sound, is going to go to this track and is capable of being recorded as MIDI data. What I'm going to do is select pattern 1 and disable its record. I don't want to record the MIDI on note data for my patterns. I want to record instrument data on the instrument track. So it's a kind of a curious looking combination where the track that we have selected is listening for MIDI information, but it's not going to record it. That MIDI information is going to be transmitted to Cubase as instructions to play style pads, and we're going to be able to record the output data from Groove Agent into this track here. Now a few more notes about settings inside Groove Agent. We've dealt with all of this stuff in previous videos, but this is where it's really starting to come together. I've engaged follow transport, which means that if I press record in Cubase, Groove Agent is going to fire up. And then I'm going to set some of my pad modes, and I'm going to set them universally for the entire kit. So I'm going to right click, select all pads. I'm going to ask for them to be all exclusive, so only one pad will ever play at a time. I'm going to ask for the pad modes to be toggled, so I can just hit a key or a pad at my choice, and then that new pad is going to play from that point onwards. I'm going to set my trigger mode to next measure, so it's going to change patterns according to my instructions, but only every bar. And we are now good to go. So I'm going to record a live kind of groove with lots of dynamic variation, and you'll see, and I'll talk over the top of some of this stuff as well. Just by the way, once you put it in toggle mode, every pad you click on actually triggers Groove Agent, so just be aware we're in kind of pending mode here, ready to go. Let's do it. As soon as we start recording, we fire up. Groove Agent fires up and is now outputting MIDI data into the instrument track. Because I have the Agent 1 pattern track selected, I can now press keys on my keyboard and interrupt what Groove Agent's doing. It's currently playing this pattern on G#-1. Let's play C0. And now, once the beginning of that measure arrived, it started playing that groove immediately. I'm going to send a C# instruction in, kind of halfway through, and it waits, and then as soon as that measure kicks off, it starts playing that rhythm. Now just bear in mind that while all of this is going on, it's C#0 that's playing and being recorded, but we can actually see G#-1. So there's no point editing this thinking you're going to make a change to the sound. You need to see what you're hearing, and you can't do that via the keyboard. You'd have to click a pad. And there, at the beginning of the next measure, we've now synced back up again. We can see what we're hearing, and so I can now start editing this style in real time, and everything that I do is going to be recorded to the output track. I can override the main pattern and make it play fill number 4 constantly, over and over again. Didn't actually talk explicitly about these options over here. The Genius black on grey colour scheme trips us up again. This says ending. We have 4 alternate endings and 4 intros. So you can hear it just playing this intro again and again. And so all of this has been on pad D0. We've got this relationship between the different pads playing different grooves, and then each of those pads has their own kind of intrinsic flexibility or rhythm style, if you like. So if I start introducing lots of this stuff, and also periodically changing pads, I can register my request for Fill 4 to be played. It's going to play Fill 4 over and over again now. And you can see that I'm submitting a request for a change to be made, maybe 1 or 2 beats ahead of when I know it's actually going to happen. So I've really got time to be as carefree as I want about submitting these requests. I want a fill to be played when it's appropriate to do so, and it'll always pick up and play it at the right time. That's the beauty of having it set to next measure. So all of those settings when we changed autofill and complexity, all of that was only appropriate to D#0. As soon as I click somewhere else, I've got that own pad's separate characteristics. So I can override this stuff whenever I want. This is now going to play Fill 6 all the time. It's still set to Fill 6. This is the one that I set really quiet. So in terms of live performance, now I'm not recording this as automation data, I'm recording the actual MIDI note data itself. So if we remember this is around bar 37, we'll come back and listen to this once it's finished. Finish with an ending. Now I didn't actually realise when I was recording that I got carried away chatting to you, and I've actually looped around on myself. Fortunately I was in stacked mode, so it has actually recorded all of that stuff. I'm going to throw the first half of it away because the only stuff that I really want to talk about was that bit right at the end where we started having the volume increase, so I'll just bring that back in. But it did record everything. You could move that out to 2 tracks, do whatever you want with it. You know, all of that data's been captured. I've created a drum map for the instrument so that we can see all our drums nice and easily. Must remember to head back into Groove Agent to turn follow transport off because we don't want it to be playing those pads anymore. And we're good to go. I wanted to talk about this bit over here where we were basically doing our stuff, pressing lots of pads and messing around, and then I selected the pad that was really quiet. And then I was talking about how, you know, the intensity was low, and as I was talking to you, I was increasing the intensity slider. All of that got baked into the real set. This is live recorded data. Rather than it being recorded in an automation track, it's actually baked in as part of the MIDI track itself. So here's me dragging the intensity slider up, and you can imagine, you know, with a little bit of practice, you treat this like a performance art. You know, you practice with your style editor, you figure out what's on the different rhythms, you get an idea of what you're going to want the song to sound like, and you just record your entire performance dynamically. Throw it in there, put 3 or 4 minutes worth of drum beat down as the ending. Excellent. And see which one you like. I mean, you saw there I cycled around a couple of times, put it in stacked mode, record as many as you want, go back, listen to them. If there are various bits in your performance attempts where you think I really like that bit and I like that the way that those fills combine together over there, chop it up, splice it together again. Total control over the MIDI data from this point onwards. In my opinion, from here on, the style play has done its job. I don't really want to go back in and start dealing with it in terms of pattern performances now. I want to take these MIDI notes and build my actual drum rhythm that I'm going to use for the rest of the song from that point onwards. So that's the acoustic style editor dealt with. In the next video, we'll deal with the percussion style editor. If you enjoyed the video and found it useful, please consider subscribing, hit notifications, and then you'll be sure not to miss it. Hope to see you then. Thanks a lot.